In order to understand our ancestors, we must understand their socio-economic condition. Census data is a valuable resource for historical inquiry. Researchers must account for its limitations when interpreting findings. Most mistakes in census data is due to human error. Respondents may provide incomplete or incorrect details, affecting the data accuracy. Name spellings can vary, and age variants are common. The spelling of a name is up to the census taker. These are the only known images of George and Sarah Trice. We're here because we are descendants of George and Sarah, or we're affiliated with someone that is. Some of us are aware that George is from South Carolina and Sarah is from Alabama, but little else is known about our ancestors. Many of you did not realize that the original surname that George used was that of Cook, George Cook. Sometime in the 1870s, George changed his family name from Cook to Trice. The change, in all probability, was done out of convenience and familiarity. After all, it would be a lot easier to explain who you worked for and who was your protector. And George lived in the Trice household for most of his life. This is a snippet of the 1870 United States federal census out of Monroe County, showing George Cook, his wife Sarah, and two of his children. This is a digital copy of the 1870 census out of Monroe County, showing George Cook, his wife Sarah, and their children William, Tank, Hattie, Babe, and Emma. I'm displaying the cover page of a 3-page document showing the will of James Albert Trice, written in 1848. James Albert Trice is the father of the Trices that migrated into Mississippi and who were the former owners of our people. This is a portion of the will of James Albert Trice listing his property. So named George, 10 years old. Once again, I'm showing a portion of the will of James Albert Trice listing his property value. Boy George, age 10 years, $450. Right below that, Negro man Ben, 60, old, $100. Right above George, Negro girl named Sally, 9 years old, $375. And above that, 10 bales of cotton, averaging 430 pounds per bale, $238.15. That equates to roughly 5.5 cents per pound. The Trices are out of Lawrence County, Alabama, which is about 100 miles or so from Monroe County. The first mention of James Albert Trice's sons being in Monroe County was in 1844 when they acquired 1,500 acres of undeveloped land. The three brothers Barnett, known as John, Robert, and James, I believe they acquired their enslaved people from Edgefield, South Carolina. I base this premise on a number of facts. James Madison Trice's top field hand, possibly overseer, was Alfred Legrone, who was from Edgefield, South Carolina, along with his brother Abram. If you look at the 1850 federal slave schedule, you'll see the owner being James Madison Trice. He has 16 enslaved people, 13 males and 3 females. 2 of the females are of childbearing age. The two 25-year-old males are Alfred and Abram Legrone. Alfred and James Madison were both born in 1825. Subsequent documents show Abram to be 1 to 2 years younger than Alfred. The 13-year-old male, that's our George. In the 1860 slave schedule of James Madison Trice, there is one male that is 22 years of age in 1860, which would be the correct age for George. In the summer of 1865, James Madison Trice made Alfred and Abram Legrone partners on a mixed estate. This was revolutionary at that time. Most freed men got nothing, or they became sharecroppers or itinerant farmers. Alfred and Abram Legrone became landowners. This is a digital copy of the 1870 census for James Madison Trice out of Monroe County. This shows his personal estate value at $10,000. That's roughly $250,000 in today's money. His real estate value is at $13,000. Then it lists his children by his first wife, Mary McGahee, who passed away about 1862. And it also shows his household members, Alfred Legrone and his family, all living under one roof. This is the third and last civil litigation against the Legrones by James Madison Trice. This all stems from an earthen dam that the Legrones constructed on the property. The first suit began in April of 1877, right after the Union troops left Mississippi because of Reconstruction. James Madison lost that suit, then filed an appeal, lost the appeal, and in this litigation, he is appealing to the Mississippi Supreme Court. He later withdraws this suit and settled with the Legrons. Alfred and Abram Legron were the sons of John Adams Legron by a Negro concubine. John Adams Legron sold his two Negro sons, possibly to appease his wife and possibly because he needed or wanted additional monies for his move to Monroe County, Mississippi. I believe George Trice is from Winsboro, Fairfield County, South Carolina, because in 1870, I believe that George returned to his original homestead as a boy, probably looking for relatives. I'm showing a snippet of the 1870 Winsboro, Fairfield County, South Carolina census showing George Bryce, his wife Sarah. I'm also showing the property owner, Robert W. Bryce. Subsequent documents show that Robert's name is Robert W. Trice. Robert W. Trice was a descendant of William Trice, whose property in the 1830s was adjacent to Burrell Cook. Both Burrell Cook and William Trice had nearly 24 enslaved people in the 1830s, and I believe George's surname, Cook, came from Burrell Cook. More research is needed. Winsboro, South Carolina is about 70 miles from Edgefield, South Carolina. James Madison Trice purchased some, if not all, of his slaves from Edgefield and marched them over 400 miles to Monroe County, Mississippi. This trip would have taken nearly a month, averaging about 20 miles a day. In the book, The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of the American Capitalism, the author, Edward Baptist, gives a detailed account of transporting enslaved people during this time. You're carrying roughly 10 pounds of chain, and you're chained at the ankles, therefore, you must march in sync with the person next to you. In 1868, George Legron petitioned the Freedmen's Bureau for monies to help start a freedmen's school. Some of our relatives attended the Legron School. There is a section in Shannon named Abetown. Some of our relatives may have married into the Legron family. In fact, Lydia Legron lived with my parents at one time. This is a picture of the Okolona Industrial School. Many of our relatives attended and graduated from the school, which began in 1904 with the Reverend Dr. Wallace A. Battle as president. I understand, as per James Oscar, Sally Lee, Emma, and in all likelihood, Maggie attended this school. My parents attended this school as well, and Uncle Butch and Aunt Retha taught at the Okolona Industrial School. This was considered a jewel. It was known as the Great Experiment. This period of time it was thought to be experimental teaching Negroes or educating Negroes. After all, the planter class did not need educated servants. The school was funded primarily by Yale University and the Methodist Church. This is a 14-page document written in 1925. Statement of President Wallace A. Battle. The Okolona tragedy. Shooting up the Okolona Industrial School. Shooting up the Turn the Other Cheek Apostle. This is a letter of resignation written by Dr. Battle to Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a member of the Board of Trustees at the school. Dr. Battle was fleeing Mississippi after the killing of one of his instructors and after being threatened by the killers after the sheriff refused to bring charges. In the introduction of the letter, Dr. Battle gives Du Bois an idea of what it was like living in Mississippi. I saw at Aberdeen, Mississippi, a year ago, one angry white man break up a Negro baseball game with 400 or 500 Negro spectators. All these Negroes were not running from one man, but the Negroes interpreted the whole situation, and so did the angry white man, as they're running from the mob that would form at night if a single black hand had been raised against this angry man. Education is probably our family's mantra. Our family legacy may very well be the over 2 dozen educators within our ranks. The first being Hattie Trice Sadler, who taught along with her husband at Russ College in Holly Springs. Then there was Emma Trice Brunson, her younger sister Maggie, and subsequent generations thereafter. I guess you could say Hattie was the alpha. 1.5 million blacks moved out of the rural South in the early 20th century up to 1940, and another 5 million left the rural areas from 1940 to 1970. The exodus from the South was fueled by the Chicago Defender newspaper. Uncle Zach, in the early part of the 20th century, was the first of George and Sarah's children to leave Mississippi and settle in Nashville. Then Uncle Babe's Sally Lee Trice Cole, and then Marshall in 1926, and then the book Souls of Black Folk by W.B. Du Bois lays out the pattern from the rural South to northern cities. You have a relative or close friend that tells you the ease of getting a job and the freedoms in the North. Employers readily hired black migrants from the South because they knew they were used to hard work and they knew they didn't want to go back. For those of you who have read the bestseller Warmth Under Different Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, you know that Ida Mae and her family surreptitiously left Oklahoma in the middle of the night in December of 1937 after settling up with the landlord after the crop had been sold. Ida Mae had great anxiety because some years you didn't get anything or you owed the landowner. But in 1937, Ida Mae and her family got paid. My father, Robert Trice, left Mississippi the same year. The average yield per acre of cotton in 1937 was nearly 2 bales per acre that year. There hasn't been another cotton crop with that high a yield until 2014. The Great Migration was fueled by economics, people wanting to make a better life for their families. So little is written about Sarah or our maternal ancestors. As difficult as it is to trace our male lineage, tracing our female lineage is 2 to 3 times harder due to name changes and customary practices of placing deeds, documents, and legal filings in a male's name up until the latter part of the 20th century. Sarah has been said to be a Vaughn by some, others claim Mobley, and I claim Sarah to be a Marshall. I've been down many rabbit holes tracing oral histories that can't be substantiated and oftentimes prove to be false. There is a Social Security application stating Sarah to be a Mobley. I base my findings not only on Uncle Zach's death certificate, but also on a codicil in George Washington Trice Sr.'s will, which states only his kin can own his land. Pi, James Oscar, and I differ when the property adjacent to Uncle Butch's property was sold, but we agree the descendants of this property are Marshalls. This is Uncle Zach's death certificate, and as you can see, his mother's maiden name is listed as Sarah Marshall. I'm showing an 1850 slave schedule for an R. Marshall. He is the owner of 2 slaves, one 49-year-old female, and it gives a color description as being black, and one 10-year-old female, a mulatto. This is the digital copy of the 1850 slave schedule for R. Marshall, showing his 2 enslaved people, a 49 and 10-year-old females. Now, I believe his name was Raleigh, but R. Marshall lived in Marshall County, which is approximately 100 miles from Monroe County. But in 1853, he passed away in Monroe County. The 10-year-old mulatto slave girl, could that have been Sarah?